So the talk is called Setting Priorities for Effective Decision Making on a Well-Run Farm. There's a few things in there. The main thing is how to make our decisions, both day to day and as the seasons go on, to make sure our farm is well run. And you can kind of ignore this. This is the description of the talk that was on the website. I pasted it in there to help myself like make my slides, and then I forgot to delete it. So there it is. Uh, so basically, the start of it is, what improvements are we going to make on our farm, for next year? Every year we try to make changes. And, if you keep your eyes open, we're here at the at the NOFA session. We got a super SOD. We can implement that if we want. We can do, look at our plants as consultants. Uh, you switch to a perennial clover cover. We can harness microbial products. We can use leaf mulch. Then we can improve our storage facility. We can work with sensors. We can uh, put in a Scrum management board. We can improve our crop rotation planning. We can do a germination chamber, plant paper pots, microgreens, biochar, seed breeding, off-season marketing. There's just everything is on and on and on of what we can do. And what I kind of, it's like if Jamie Lannister was a farmer, he'd say, there's so many changes they want you to do, decrease packaging, redo your packing shed, build up your soil fertility, and it just becomes too much to deal with. To kind of throw your hands up and what am I actually going to do on the farm? What's going to give me the most benefit? And that's kind of what I want to get at with this talk today is, what's a framework for how we make these decisions on the farm, how we set our priorities, what is the first thing that I'm going to tackle that I'm going to get the most bang for the buck. We can also like improve our intuition because I feel like, there's all these different methods out there. We get advice from a lot of different sources. And by kind of strengthening our own intuition of what we feel like, what we're doing on our farm, what works for us, what our farm needs, then we can kind of filter through what we hear from out there, both like in terms of methods to suggest and other like types of advice, and kind of like resist the advice that, I wrote bad advice on this slide. Maybe it's not bad advice, but maybe it's not the right advice for how our farm operates, and instead kind of focus on what, we need for our farm. So about 3 parts to this. We'll start with an introduction, talk about how my farm runs a bit and a bit about my farm, talk about some principles that I use to kind of like guide my decision making, and then some applications of those principles to both season to season, day to day running of our farm. So I'm Mike. I run Roots Farm in Tiverton. There we are in Rhode Island, East Bay, Rhode Island. We're Zone 7A, the banana belt of, am I in your, I'm the banana belt of New England. We're certified organic. The property I'm on is we were on is 6 acres. We do about 2 acres of vegetables on that. We moved to this property in 2010. We've been farming since then. This is overhead view of our property. You can see, plots here, plots here. This is our newest field. We do movable high tunnels. We've got 6 production movable high tunnels. All the high tunnels are 30 by 48, and that's kind of like each of these rectangles is the 30 by 48. There's actually a high tunnel there, but it's movable in 3 position. And there's 6 high tunnels, you can move in 3 positions. So each of those plots are 8 beds, 30 inches wide, Elliott Coleman style. We got 33.5 plots altogether. Net sales currently are about, all right, so 2022 gross sales were actually a little high, maybe like 315. Net income for the farm on that is about 100,000 before taxes and depreciation. So if you work that up per bed, we're at $28 per 30-inch bed foot. And during the summer, it's me, my wife Kelly, and 7 employees. And then right now we've got 2 full-time employees through the winter and a couple of part-time. So we started in 2009 on rented land in Bristol. So that's like this was our first year, the brown pork and old pork pasture, and then this was where we ended up. So I'm going through a bit of like our history and like our farm as a way to kind of like contextualize where I'm coming from and like what we've done and what has worked for us. So you can kind of like learn a little bit about where I'm coming from. So when you're trying to decide, hey, is what Mike talking about, how does that relate to me? You can kind of compare your experience to what we're doing. Uh, this table is kind of like a timeline. This is like the farm history at a glance. It's a real information packed, and I think without the context, it might be a little bit overwhelming. I'll skip to the next slide and come back for a second. Uh, you know, years here. This was our gross sales for the year. Uh, the number of plots, so like I said, each one is a 30 by 48 plot. How many production being we had, number of employees we had, FTEs full-time equivalent. So like even though we had, 5 employees or 6 employees and not full-time year round. There's been in one column for, classic guy style, when we have kids, 2012 and 2016. And then the markets, winter markets and summer markets and winter markets. So we started, we had one summer market, added up 2 summer markets, winter market, added a third summer market, 2 winter markets. So that's where we are right now. 3 summer markets, 2 winter markets, year-round CSA. We built a ceiling house, we built a barn. This is when I left my other job and started farming full time, and some other projects there. And in graph form, that gross income, this is what it looks like. Um, you can see on the left-hand side is kind of when we were farming through time and kind of like bumbling along. Then when I left my job, we like scaled up. And now, this is 2020. We're kind of like leveling off and like getting to a stable, this is kind of like the size that we want to be. We're not like growing anymore. And I feel like this is important to point out because I feel like the farm, like what you do as a farmer is very different when you're like even gaining something else a year versus when you're kind of like each year you're kind of like stable and just kind of trying to improve what you're doing, instead of like scaling up. Um, so mostly, okay, that's where I'm coming from. Uh, so next up is a couple of principles of what guides our decision making. And I'm going to mostly talk about a couple of books that I find relevant. One is The Lean Farm, which I'll talk about next, which a lot of you probably are familiar with. This one, I don't think anyone would be very familiar with in farming circles because I haven't seen it discussed. This was actually assigned reading in college manufacturing engineering course. Um, and so I had it in my bookshelf for years, and then like, you know, after I started the farm, I was like, hey, after reading the Lean Farm, actually, I was like, I wonder if that other book that I skimmed through in college would be useful. Um, and it is very useful actually. So we'll kind of talk about some. It's called The Goal, um, and you know, um, it's like the Lean Farm. It's about manufacturing techniques, of how to like what they used to run a factory well, but you can apply it to running a farm. Maybe kind of like tweak some of the thinking behind it. So it's a struggling thinking management, change operation around, everything's great. It's a little bit cheesy, but it's an easy read. So the reason I like it as a guide is because it's a good strategic blueprint for how to make change, like how to think about what you're doing. Um, and so in this context, like when I'm talking, say strategy, I mean like, so strategy is like, what am I trying to accomplish? What is like, you know, yeah. So strategy, what I'm trying to accomplish, and that this is a good blueprint for that. Whereas the lean farm, uh, I feel like it's a good then tactical blueprint, which is like how I'm going to go about doing. So the lean farm, Ben Hartman, 2015, also based on manufacturing techniques. Um, I feel like it's more commonly out there. Any show of hands, how many people either read the book, own the book? Anyone out there? From the book? So my thought of Lean Farm, it's a really good book. The farm is really well run. He's a great farmer. But I find in reading that book that I didn't get a great sense of how to, you know, prioritize approaching the material. Um, there's some things that he presents in there that are contradictory. And so then you have to decide, well, which of the principles that he's presenting applies to my situation. And I feel like, you know, I felt left without a sense of like exactly how to go about deciding. So for example, one of the ones that really jumped out at me was like a discussion about like pruning and trellising tomatoes. So on one page, he says, when you're pruning and trellising tomatoes, that's doesn't add value to the tomatoes. You have to like minimize that kind of like crop care work. Uh, but then they show, but in the previous stage, he's harvesting peppers that are clearly like pruned to a single leader. So, here you have tomatoes that are sleeping weed. Here you got peppers that are, uh, later in the book, he says, well, you have to like maximize your fixed costs, which means like make the most use out of like your greenhouses, for example. So that's probably the balancing act here is like, well, do you put the work into the crops to maximize the use of that greenhouse, or do you kind of like stake and leave and let them go a bit? And where is it beneficial to like put the extra work so you get more benefit out of the greenhouse? Where do you kind of like let the crop go? And I feel like I didn't get a great answer on that. And so like again, I get the feeling Kelly went over these slides and she was like, toned it down in the lean farm. It's like, well, it is really great. But again, I just felt like there was a little bit missing, which was, the first part of the book was he goes over 5S, you go through like sort, set in order, shine, standardize, sustain. And it's like, you're supposed to like do all this and then unlock seeing value on your farm. Um, and this is what I mean when it's like good tactical advice is a lot of like what to do and how to do things, but not necessarily like why and what you're trying to accomplish. So um, I'll come back to this because once you decide what you want to accomplish, it's great resource. But I think there's the previous step of like, okay, well, um, what are we trying to accomplish? The other uh, missing piece, I think, like that's a barrier to like for me at least personally in terms of like putting some of these things in action is that commitment. Like I talked about in the earlier slide about having that intuition of like what my farm needs. um, if you have that end goal inside of like, okay, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, then it's a lot easier to be like, okay, you know my crew is tired of tripping over everything in the barn, and so I need to like get this stuff cleaned up, and now I can like commit to like doing these things. But just by themselves without like a driving force, it can be a little hard to like make the jump. Um, so we'll come back to the lean farm later. Now we'll come back, go to, a little more in depth about this book, The Goal. Uh, and if spoiler alert, the goal that the book is titled after is the business has to make money. So the goal of the business is to make money. Now, clearly, we didn't all start farms to make money. I think if you started a farm with the sole purpose of making money, I might suggest getting referred for a cranial MRI because they might find rocks in your head. Um, but, we wanted to farm, I guess, for a lot of us, we wanted to farm, we wanted to grow food, and farming as a business allows us to do it as a vocation, as a lifestyle. Uh, it becomes your way of life without having to like, um, be distracted by going into the office every day. Um, and so, we have our own personal reasons for farming, but if the farm itself doesn't make money, then there is no more farm. If you can't sustain yourself with the income from the farm, then there will be no more farm, and all those other personal goals won't happen. So if you want to farm, then the farm has to make money. And now if you manage the farm well, you can keep a little bit of like time for yourself to make sure you can get your other goals met. Um, the other thing is a lot of the reasons farmers stop farming are either directly or indirectly financial. So as much as like we didn't go into farming to like keep an eye on those financial decisions, uh, if you hear like people that have gotten out of farming, a lot of it has to do with either like overwork, not being able to take time off, wear and tear on your body, um, all this other stuff that if you had a more comfortable financial position, you can hire more workers so you don't have to like work so many hours or like, you know, spend the time training your crew so that you can take days off. All these things can happen, but it takes that like financial cushion that if you're living on the edge, makes that difficult. So, back to the goal, uh, a lot of like the way the novel's presented is, kind of like the uh, author kind of has like his avatar as a consultant who's like trying to like guide this factory manager through like the steps to like making these changes. One of the things he does is, the factory manager takes his kid on a hiking trip, and so this becomes like a little bit of a parable to like how he manages the hiking trip versus like what changes he's going to make in the factory. And they're hiking through the woods. It's going to be an overnight trip with the Boy Scout troop, uh, and then like around lunchtime, you realize that they're like way behind schedule. We're never going to make it, the rate we're going. And he tries to like think of like why are they running behind? And what he realizes is um, that the pace of the group is determined by the slowest kid in the group. Uh, and so, he just let the kids go. He was walking with the slowest kids. The fastest kids were, way beyond sight. Uh, and so there was no communication amongst the different kids. There was no like group cohesion. So the first thing he did was, all right, he stopped the group. He put the slowest kid in the front, and now everybody had to go behind the slowest kid. Now at least that way you see it. This is how fast we're going. And then once they realized, and they said, okay, well, this is how fast we're going. What can we do to help the slowest kid go a little faster? Uh, and that's when they found, well, he's got a gigantic backpack with, two tents and four camp stoves and pots and pans in there. Take that off that kid, give it to some of the faster kids, and now the whole group can move a little faster. Uh, and so, that becomes kind of like the, um, one of the center theme of the book is that the performance of the whole farm, the whole factory, the whole system is limited by this constraint, and you got to find out this constraint. So we often think of instead of like constraints, we think of it like the word limiting factor, uh, which I think constraint is a little bit broader because limiting factor. I feel like if we think of the term limiting factor, at least in my mind jumps to limiting factor of production. And the constraint isn't necessarily in production. There's other parts of the farm that are non-production, and so constraint is a bit of a more general term. It can be anything. Especially, and I would argue in a farm, production is often not the constraint. So we can call it constraint, we can call it a bottleneck, but the thing is that bottleneck limits, what the whole system, the whole farm can do. So in this example, when you looks at the factory, they had like this one machine tool that had like work piled up all around it. You couldn't even find the machine because it was so backed up. Uh, and what you realized was, okay, well, if everything if what's going through the machine is holding back everything that's going through this factory, then if that machine is down for any reason, then that factory is down. So an hour wasted at the bottleneck is an hour wasted not just at the bottleneck, but the entire future. And so it's really important to know where your bottlenecks are. Whereas, if we're um, trying to shave efficiency in places that are not those bottlenecks, it doesn't really affect your system. It's a mirage. You can make your non-bottlenecks more efficient, and you're not going to gain anything because everything is still locked up with the bottleneck. Um, so you can start to see why, like, okay, if you kind of like start to figure this stuff out, you can really look through a lot of like, where can I put my efforts? So managing those bottlenecks is like really the whole thing of trying to like what we're getting at. And once you find those bottlenecks, those constraints, then you don't just like this is my constraint. There's a few things you do about it. So one, you limit the system's production to the capacity of the constraint. That's kind of a lot of fancy language. I didn't mean to like make that so word unit. So limit the production to that constraint. That's equivalent of like, okay, the slowest kid goes to the front of the line. And so nobody walks in from everything else should slow down. That way you're not wasting energy. You know, those faster kids aren't running like forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, like when you're walking a dog in the woods. You know, everything goes to the pace of you limit what you put through to the constraint. But now you know how fast everything's going. You want to make sure that that bottleneck keeps moving. Um, you know, so if that kid needs a snack, he doesn't stop and rummage for it. Someone else gets it to him. You know, someone else in the water bottle. You know, he needs to tie his shoes. Maybe someone else got to tie his shoes. You know, while he's walking or something. Um, and then number three, inform tasks when possible, lighten its load. So that heavy pack, we take that heavy pack off. Anything that can be done, you know, in the flipping example, we won't use the 115 kilo, so we can't necessarily like constantly doing. Uh, you know, you can imagine like in the machine, in the factory example, there were some simpler tasks that didn't have to go through this machine, they could go through a different machine or something. And then finally, you can build them with this points capacity. So if we're going to go through making it again with the same kids, you know, we put if we have the slower kid do some exercises, do practice hikes and everything, and allow them to walk faster, then everybody gets to walk faster. So now all of these are things for where our brain next and this we want to focus, and then we don't really want to stress too much about, you know, what the faster kids are doing, because we know, you know, they can stop and tie their food and you know, catch up. They can have a snack, dig through their backpacks and catch up. Uh, it's the bottlenecks we want to focus on. So catch my breath, you know, when we talk about these bottlenecks, they're really only like two or three that each flight operation. You know, it's not like we're like hunting for like a dozen. It's really like two or three key things that we want to hone in on. So with that, you know, what are two to three principal constraints on you can either say on your farm if you're confident, or if you think on your farm, or else in general, what are common constraints on farms? I want to show hands if anyone's got any ideas of where those bottlenecks might be. Labor, or it's like time spent in labor. Okay. So labor as a whole, yeah, or just like the ability to have hands working for that. Anyone else? Saying? Anyone else? Running big greens and roots, and then bagging. Running and bagging baby greens. Okay. Anyone else? Market labor. So like market style staffing. Okay. Land. Is it different a little bit? Detention planning after long, you know, day to ensure you jobs. So like planning, following along from. And then with productive flow instead of too many. Purchasing. Okay. Related to that, and then it's like infrastructure or just like pay for it. Infrastructure, money for infrastructure. Anyone else? I think weather, like having them drive a lot of time for cultivation windows. Okay. Health of the soil. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Those are all really good. I have two that I want to discuss that touch on some of those. And I think let's see. So one of the things that makes a constraint like in a bottleneck stay a bottleneck is that it can be very hard to address. Um, so now farming is a little different. You brought up labor. One of the things that I struggle with fitting farming into this framework is that I feel like labor wise, uh, we just don't have a lot of margin. And I think there's not a lot of businesses like that where the margins are still so like razor thin between like your high cost of labor. Because like you say like, well, labor's a bottleneck, but we could always hire more people. But then we have a financial uh, hit on that side. So, but yeah, so the two that I most common constraints that I think are applied most widely across the board for any farm are sales and then the farmer's time. Um, and so some other constraints can come up, especially if your operations changing, scaling up, like when we're on that like rapid slope. Um, you can hit these like limited limits that you didn't expect. So for example, like if you suddenly doubled what you were growing, then your walking cooler might look like this. That's literally like this is the door. Um, and that was our old 8x8 walking cooler. So you can get to things like this, but then okay, well, the next year we like build the cooler that was 4 times the size. And if you have like uh, you don't always if you have the if the farm is hitting its stride financially, then when you hit a bottleneck like this, then you can find a way to like make it work. But there's things like sales and the farmer's time, they're just not more of those available. Well, sorry. Financing, there's no more available than sales. It's a little trickier, but generally that's one where like that's where we hit limits, um, especially on you know, if production is fluctuating. Um, so I'll talk about these two in more detail for each of them, um, and we can kind of think about some of those other ones as how they fit in. So sales first. What does it feel like if sales is a bottleneck on the farm? Well, you're growing all this stuff, you take it to the market, then you bring it home, then you compost it or donate it. And like no matter how much you try to improve your labor efficiency, and get your weed control down, and you're getting your food to work super efficiently and getting all these new tools and everything. No matter what you do in production side, you're not keeping up financially because you're running all this stuff and you're not selling. Um, and so, we only make money through sales. Production's important, but without sales, a farm is a compost pile. So, in terms of like making the sales work, um, remember to like, we have to prioritize it. So vegetable sales at least work on habits. I feel like people go to the farmer's market or sign up to the CSA and then, they eat every week. And if you can provide, you know, consistent product week in, week out, your sales will stay high. People will know to come to you. Don't miss a market if you miss a market, you better have a very good reason, like, with, uh, have some on staffing if you want, if yeah, and get a flat tire, whatever, do everything you can to get to the market. Um, and then, like you mentioned with, you go hiking, the slowest kid acts in front, your production needs to match the sales. So every year, based on your sales, your production, you want to match it. Um, and so if you follow this, ideally you want your sell-through to be over 90%, meaning of everything you grow, you want to sell over 90%. If you sell less than that, if your sell-through goes less, that is margin that you're eating up. Um, and basically that's where you make all the improvements to your production efficiency, but are running and still standing still because uh, all your harvested product is going to waste. Um, so a little example of how this might work out. I'm gonna do a little math. Everyone's asking plays over. But let's say this involved about 5 acres. Uh, I'm just gonna throw some numbers out there for this example. But so we 5 acres. Net gross sales were 200,000. Net income each of them was 35,000. Alice decides she wants to make more money, so instead of planting 5 acres, she's going to crop 6 acres next year is done with this. So instead of doing 5 acres, he wants to come back to 4 because he's kind of dealing with that crowd. And so who's going to net more? And so this is, a little bit of a trick question because regardless how much they grow, how many acres, how much production, really how much money comes in is based on sales. So if they started at 80% sell through, which is middling, uh, and they don't make any changes in sales, in their sales channels, then the results might not be like what they expected. So, like I said, 80% see-through. So that means for the 200,000 gross sales, they're growing 250,000 worth of produce. So on their 3 days, they produced 250,000, only sold 200. And so their net was 35. So their expenses were 165,000. So now we're backing that up out of the example. And so then Alice will produce more next year because she's cropping 6 acres. But is she going to see more? Her expenses are going to be higher because she's going 6 acres instead of 5. But if she doesn't make any efforts to change her sales, then she's going to definitely be worse off because she's going to have more expenses, super more production, sure, but if she didn't sell it, then she's going to go backwards. Now, if Bob keeps production by 25%, so he's doing 4 acres, so let's say he's doing, and this is all like, you can probably cut from 5 acres to 4 and keep your production at the same level, but let's say he cuts the production down. He might maybe because he's the two his sales might dip a little bit, but his expenses will go down too. And so the net income might end up actually going up from cutting back his production to better match what his sales are. I guess that's the key there is he's starting from a place where he was only selling 80% of what he was drawing, and I was doing money, so he's selling like 95%, and his net income can go up. So, and as a benefit, he might be less stressed out, which is good. So, um, so final, when if you're growing your farm operation, make sure you lead with sales. Grow your farm as your sales lead. You can't grow with just production. So from this to here that I showed earlier, in 2014, that was when I left my previous job, and we started 2 much busier summer markets that allowed us to like ramp up our sales. We added a food summer market to like take off our growth a little more. So, so that was the discussion on the sales as a constraint. Basically, I feel like that's an infinite limit that we have a hard time overcoming, and you just want to make sure your production then stays where you can sell. So any questions on this sales section? All right. So the second one is the farmer's time. The farmer being the person that makes the decisions and sets the priorities. And so that's the most like intractable, stubborn constraint that's going to apply to every farm. Who's got the person with the expertise in making the decisions. That person is going to be like the slow kid hiking. And so, what does it feel like when the farmer's time is a constraint? If you're the farmer, you feel like you can't take any days off because things go to a standstill when you're not there. All your office work and all your other like solo work you either do on the weekends or in the evening because your weekdays are spent like working with the crew and managing the farm. Your basic self-care, you're putting that off till January because who has time for that? And so you kind of have this like building frustration that like unless you're like there, then things start falling apart. And so one of the biggest things to do about it is to then like recognize your time's value and act upon it and make those changes to like deal accordingly. And like I mentioned earlier, like building your intuition so you can make your decisions. If you value your time as a bottleneck for the whole farm, it can change how you look at things. So in this case, let's say how much is your time worth to the farm during the peak season? So I'm going to take the same numbers from the Alice and Bob example. So see, we sold 200,000, our expenses 165,000, so we're netting 35,000. Let's assume 2,000 hours of work a year. That's maybe that's low, but whatever. And we're at 1750 an hour. And that might be our average hourly wage because we're just taking our net income and divided by the hours worked. But it's not the value of our time to the farm as like the principal farmer. Because our time is bottleneck. And so if our time stops, if we're not there, if we feel like things have fallen apart, Now, the value of our time during the peak season, again, during the peak season, not in January, is based on not let's like with green sales. All the expenses are already baked into the cake. They're happening anyway. The tools coming to work. You've already bought your amendments, the seeds, the stall fees. You're paying your mortgage, whatever. All the expenses are there. But if you're not there, then what's in jeopardy is the entire net gross income. And so if you are the bottleneck for the farm, then your time is not the net revenue, it's the gross divided by the hour of work. So more like $5 an hour. What is the value of your time to the farm? Now, good luck, like, keeping that to yourself. You're not going to keep that. But as you make decisions, when you have a number in your mind, it helps a lot to see, cut through a lot of that, like, um, what should I say? It's like, coming and coming and like, should I do this or not? Like, should I delegate this task or not? Because it takes this person like 4 times as long and I have to pay them an hourly wage, whereas I can do it in 15 minutes. My time is worth this much. It can change my mental calculations a little bit of what I delegate, what I do myself, what I decide isn't worth it when I buy new tools. Because this is the time that this is the value that I'm looking at. Now, that's something, it does matter, how the maturity of the operation, how much cash flow you have, because, as if you just don't have the time, the money to delegate and everything, then if the cash isn't there, it's not there. But if your business is at that like more stable level where you can uh, pencil out the financial decisions, you can make that work. So, to summarize what do we do with constraints and how do we apply the 4 points to sales and farmers' time? So number one, limit the system production and the capacity of the constraints. So in sales, I talked about that. Make sure your production stays like dialed in to where your sales are and you make adjustments every year. Uh, I didn't really think about that in terms of farmers' time, but that's one number one where like each year as you assess your own like feelings toward the farm, you know, just then scale back if needed. If you're overwhelmed, bring in more labor if needed. If you're overwhelmed, delegate more tasks. All this stuff to try to like get get the farm to operate at your capacity. Um, keep it moving. So in sales, don't miss markets. Uh, make sure you have backup plans in place. In your own farming, here I don't mean like, make sure you take care of yourself. This means, don't misinterpret this. It means don't work yourself to the bone because you have to keep moving. You can't afford to just like, you know, uh, break down halfway through the season. Keep that self-care, keep yourself at a level that you can without burning yourself out. Uh, and for, offload tasks, so, delegate your own tasks, need people to do your tasks, lighten your load, and then also, uh, build up your own capacity in terms of like sales, build up your sales channels, support your farmers markets. If you decide, you need to, build up your CSA, build up other, sales channels, also build up your own capacity as a farmer. Each year, you can, your ability to manage isn't stagnant. You can always improve your skills. Um, so any questions on either like the managing the bottlenecks of these two examples? I'm about to move on to the next slide. Okay, but what I in the first which has been a pattern on those frames is a lot of participants on the left side, on this. And this, it's like, you the way kind of decide, this is one step, on the group chat, or just see it on this is only for me, going to slowly for wearing masks, good times. And also very between when I think one of my employees was out, and so we had to like bring our kids to the market, and that was like a way to like not have to miss the market was have our kids work with us. Um, so so based on those principles, now we'll talk a bit about applications of okay. So we have our like on mind what we're how we're dealing with dealing with bottlenecks, how do we take that down to like managing our farm? Um, so I'm gonna start with kind of some like seasonal decisions, mainly, making the crop plan and adjusting that is going to be one of the principal ones. Like I said, that's the way you adjust your production to your sales and also planning to delegate tasks. Then some weekly and daily planning stuff about setting priorities. And finally, this making improvements is more on like broader picture um, farm improvements. So on our front plan, the first step to matching that like production to sales is some of our crop benchmarks. Um, we do one benchmark on our farm really for all our crops, and it's dollars per bed. And this is the dollars gross value of the crop harvested per bed of that crop grown. So again, this is gross. So it's, say like if we harvest, 200 pounds of squash out of the bed, then it's 200 pounds times our dollars per pound that we sell it for. And that's like the gross sales per bed, the gross harvested per bed. And then we can have to like make some mental adjustments. So it's a way to compare apples to apples. We use per bed numbers because all our beds are the same length. And so that allows us to compare pretty easily. If you're rather you can use dollars per acre or dollars per bed foot if your beds are different lengths. But the point being you have like a standard number. The dollars per bed for us is nice. I feel like it gives us like numbers that are easy to work in. Our range is 300 to 3,000. Most of our crops are in like the $700 per bed range, which I think is like a number you can get your head around. If you have something that's like $10 per bed foot, it's harder to like. I feel like it's harder to like intuitively get a grasp of what that means. Um, so another reason why the dollar per bed works for us as a benchmark, it's not so modified, but for us, our growing space is a bit of a bottleneck. We crank out for the space we grow, but we're definitely like packing it in.
On this one, I see like space is the limiting factor. I think that they want to say space that matter. Do you sometimes, or have you seen time being used as a bad word? Because
Yeah, so
farmer's time is the constraint available.
even in sense where it was sounds like repeat your question, but I'm fumbling here. Uh, so you can use the space, dollars per bed or per area as a benchmark because our growing space is a limiting factor. Would we ever use time as a benchmark? I think I've seen farms use like say dollars per hour of like harvested value because that's an easy time that you can capture. Otherwise, it can be hard to capture the time, between like bed prep, seeding, cultivation, hand weeding, whatever. Whereas harvest is like you can kind of like put a clock on that a little bit easier. Um, and that tends to be a pretty labor intensive, a big part of it anyway. So dollars per hour harvested is another possibility you could use. Um, and the benefit to that is if you're doing a lot of the work yourself, it applies to yourself. But if you have a higher crew, it also applies to your crew. And so you can kind of like make sure you're getting that margin on your higher labor. Um, but yeah, it's a different, we find this is good because we can track this. That would be a different thing you have to track and find a way to track. As it is, we can have to like count people to write stuff down. Uh, so
In Derek's session in the morning,
Mhm.
to say that it's three ways to become profitable.
Yep.
Bigger, sell a specialty crop, or fit yourself to your audience. Especially a high rich audience. It seems like you grew what you did. Is this driving to specialize because certain things will just have much higher per bed dollars, and does that get you in conflict with your one of those three strategies and how you're actually about
um, let me go through more on the benchmarks and then come back to that because I feel like once we kind of like finish the benchmark discussion, it might make a little more sense. But basically, I was saying Derek early this morning said 3 strategies for profitability. We're getting bigger, which I don't. Well, we're getting bigger. High value crops.
Yeah.
And feeding your audience. Okay. So, um, and so I think once we go through the benchmarks, we can look at that a little more. Um, so, uh, last point on this benchmark though is, like you mentioned, okay, for instance, it works because bed space is limited, but this can work for you even if your growing area is not a limit because you can use growing area as a bit of a proxy for how much work you put in. If you do it with that in mind, in terms of like, hoeing a bed is going to be about the same, like bed prep, seating, the amendments that go in. You can kind of like just use the area as a proxy, whether you're really concerned about area or just the time that goes in. Um, so again, things that we can do, if you're looking at, starting a farm, you can use it as a way to set some targets in terms of like, if I have a new sales target based on like, the markets I want to do and CSA member, then whatever. And so, we can estimate $1 per bed and see how much we want to do. Post-season, we can make it two how much dollars per bed each crop yielded for the year, and then we can use that as information to adjust for next year. And then in season, you can do, if you want to check like how thick crops are doing, you can do a timed, value per harvest hour. But we can also just kind of see, how is this crop doing? We harvested 20 feet of potatoes. How much did that yield? What's that like? How does that compare to the chart? Like, are they scientific enough? Can they grow a little bit more? Or is it a good potato year or a bad potato year? You can kind of just use that to kind of like figure out how things are going. And you can also use it as a bit of a, probably a little bit more, but how much time am I going to spend on these carrots? If a bed of carrots is, $500, is it worth hand weeding or should I just like tarp it and be done with it? Now, you know, it's benchmarked at dollars per bed, but it's not like the goal itself. And so you kind of have to like make sure you kind of keep your intuition working with it. So that's one of the good and bad things about benchmarks is that like the good thing is it's a number that's easy to calculate, but the bad thing, it can be bad. It doesn't have all the information in it. You kind of have to fill in the blanks with what you know from working with it. So the example I usually give is scallions, a little scallion story, which one year I decided, hey, our scallions dollars per bed were like on the lower side. What can I do to like, make the scallions more profitable? And I had this great idea that instead of putting them like 3 rows per bed, I'm going to grow them 4 rows per bed and then it comes to 12. And we're going to like pack them in. And that way, like our dollars per bed for scallions are going to like go away. It's going to be great. And then, halfway through the season, I'm like, how is this scallion cleanup taking like, someone's cleaning up the scallions and it's starting at like 9 a.m. and at like 4 p.m. they're still cleaning up the scallions. And what the hell is going on? And that's when I realized, like, okay, so I've always put on scallions went up. And I see a bunch of, like 8 to 10 good sun scallions. There were like 30 like little mini ones. And you're trying to like do that. Depends on how the number of scallions, not like how big they are. So that's when I was like, oh, so let's dive into spacing again, my failed experiment. Just because, we're gonna like tap them in and like try to affect this number here doesn't mean, this number itself is just a measurement. We kind of have to then keep our intuition in mind of like what else is going on. So a thing that I'm not captured by dollars per bed, like I mentioned, is that it's sound. This is just what's been harvested. So now if it's sold or not, that's something you have to fill in yourself. How long is it in the ground? And it's freezing in the ground, preventing us from growing something else in that space. How much work is it to do? Is the work kind of all like come together at a busy time of year? Or is it something that is a lot of work, but like, say like popping garlic cloves to plant garlic, you know, whatever, who cares? It's like November anyway. But like picking strawberries in June, that's the time that you could be using to do something else. And then, even just this is like, are we really growing it, or are we done with it? So, we want to like kind of keep our intuition working. We can use the dollars per bed as like, all right, so which one, how do these crops compare? But then once we kind of have that number, we do still need to put our like minds to work. Um, but again, resist the temptation to make the numbers more complicated than they need to be. So I see somewhere like, oh, well, that is great. Well, you can do English for to get like the real like baseline. I don't really like, something like dollars per bed to for a week because if you're comparing things in your mind, you can kind of get a sense of like, which crops in the ground at tender or months and which aren't. So, for example, like garlic is in the ground a long time, but from like November, April, you really don't feel it. Whereas like sweet potatoes are probably in the ground a shorter time, but it's like May to October, and the can't grow anything else besides the sweet potatoes in that plot, where the garlic you can get a later crop in. And so, what matters more than how many weeks is in the ground is like can be like still put a second crop in for the same in the same beds. What else could we grow in that space like during that time? So um, so you want to keep your numbers simple enough uh, that like you can get them easily and get them consistently so you can compare them year to year without bogging down in like the number details. Because sometimes like um, you know, doing too many detailed numbers can be detrimental. So we have a benchmark and now we want to update the crop plan. So this is where we get to like, all right, what's our profitability strategy? Um, you know, we look at the benchmarks and we decide, okay, what do we need to grow more of? What do we want to grow less? Um, And then, we can kind of like do an initial feel of like, all right, this is a profitable crop. This crop is bringing a lot of money. We like growing it and it's selling. We could grow more. We could sell more of it. Let's grow more of it. But if there's a crop that's like, you know, it's bringing a lot of money, it's on paper, it's a lot of money, but we're not going to be able to sell anymore. So I think now we see like jalapenos is like the sticking line there. It's like, well, yes, it's like technically like $2,000 a bed or something because we've got like 11 plants and we sell them like by the each. But we know that we can't like sell more of them by the each. So unless we like cut the price to sell them in bulk, I'm not going to grow more jalapenos as long as I feel like I'm like selling them okay. Uh, whereas something like shishitos, we scaled up. Now we're at a level where like we have a good amount of shishitos, but we did a trial, did a half a bed, and found that we did well, and then we scaled that up once we saw like what the value was coming out. Um, so you know, we kind of like first make a first class of like, all right, based on this benchmark and how our feelings are for what crop, what sold, and how much money they're bringing in, what would we like to grow more or less of? But then you have to kind of like check your head with, you know, are they going to run into growing space issues? Are they crops that are going into high tunnel? If they're going into high tunnel, well, what's coming out of the high tunnel? Uh, and then we also end up with similar things. It's things change year to year. That is hard to predict. And it's more things you can kind of like you pretty much only know after you run into it. Like if your ceiling fills up in the spring because you decided to do a bunch more like early plants that you hadn't done before, or else if like you brought up you're like, oh, let's do our peppers earlier, and all of a sudden your peppers and your tomatoes and your eggplants all need to go in the ground at the same time. Uh, you can kind of like run into issues like that as you make these changes. But there's not necessarily easy to like predict. Um, Now on some of those low value crops that end up at the bottom of that chart, um, we have some options of what we want to do with them. Um, one is you can eliminate some low value crops. This is my son. He grew some pumpkins in his own little garden. We didn't grow pumpkins in our beds because we eliminated them. You can still grow them for yourself, but you don't have to grow them for production. So that's one thing you can do if you're like, well, this pump really isn't paying its way. Second thing you can do is increase the price. Uh, that does wonders about making you feel better about growing something. Is like if you're like charging more for it. Like if you hate picking green beans, well, if you up the price of them, you feel a lot better about it. Same thing with like, we used to sell potatoes for $2 a pound, and we're like, are we really going to grow any more potatoes? And then we found out other people were selling them for $3 a pound, and we're like, well, at $3 a pound, they make a lot more sense for us. So let's just up the price and see. And then you can the sales might change, but then you adjust your production based on how the sales change. So, and then the final option is, all right, well, what we're doing for this crop, we really have to like overhaul how we do production. For an example of this would be like we switched from growing bush green beans to growing pole beans. Um, that kind of like, changing how you see carrots, changing to paper pots, for example, that kind of like big change in production systems. And you really can only do like 2 to 3 crops of these per year. That these are things that take a lot of like attention to get right. And so don't be like, oh, everything below like X dollars a bed, I'm gonna like overhaul the production. Like you can't quite do that. So just like pick your battles. Um, so in terms of like where we go for like profitability, um, I think matching your production to sales is a bit of a combination of you grow into high value crops because that tends to be like you grow as much high value crops as you can sell, but also doing what your customers want because you're matching what you're growing to what is sold so far, like it's sold last year. Uh, so I don't know if like that then answers that part or
I have a separate question.
separate part. Okay. So
Let's see if this is something.
oh yeah. Let's see, 440. Yeah. So all right. Any other questions before I move on? All right, do you want to just ask your other question or
Yeah.
I'll decide if
I see how this works on a crop basis.
Yep.
But I don't have experience selling to CSAs where you may be selling a bundle of crops and people are expecting certain things and things in low value ones, where they're like, hey, how come you don't have any functions? We kind of need one. Like it's a little bit. Does that come up or is it just
all right, so in terms of like selling to CSAs, if you do a CSA, will the CSA miss some of these low value crops that you've eliminated? Um, I can't answer that question because the way we do our CSA is we don't like do a set box. Everyone puts in an order for what they want. So pumpkins and sometimes, so pumpkins just aren't necessarily available. And sometimes though, we'll buy in, I don't really love, well, we don't really love managing like bought in stuff that much, but we will buy, like now we don't grow sweet potatoes anymore, but we buy them in. Um, and so, if you have a market that wants certain crops, but you don't want to grow them, that is also an option. Um, and actually for us, it works really well because there's a farm that like does like also sweet potatoes and then grow like just like tons of bed feet of sweet potatoes. And it's like, this is great. And just like, so pick them up and we're done. So, uh, another like in terms of numbers that we don't do crop budgets. Um, and so, this is another one where like, you know, I read about crop budgets and everyone says, oh, you should do crop budgets. And I'm like, I don't really want to do crop budgets. I don't think it'd be that useful. And so like now I'm kind of like, okay, I think I saw like a JM40 or presentation where he said he doesn't do crop budgets. I'm like, yeah, right. I'm going to do crop budgets. I think we didn't start doing crop budgets because we're on that like up slope. And if things are changing so much year to year, then what's the point of like doing a crop budget for growing like 20 bed feet of carrots when in like 3 years you're going to be seeding like 400 bed feet of carrots at a time. It's going to change your numbers quite a bit. So I feel like until you have like a stable operation, is like, well, what's I'd rather the dollars per bed was easy and to fill in the gaps with information. Whereas like doing a crop budget is work. Uh, so, if you feel like your business could benefit from it, then, no one's stopping it. I think it probably makes more sense, like if you're doing fewer crops to decide between, and if you're like really doing like, again, thousands of bed feet of sweet potatoes or thousands of bed feet of regular potatoes and where the expenses are and stuff, then you can like dial those in. But I think when we're doing like 40 different crops, I find to not make it worthwhile. Um, but that's it. Okay, so we can't do a benchmark without weapons. And so we need to capture that information week to week during the season so that in the off season we can get our benchmark. So we use harvest records to make sure like we capture that like dollars per bed harvested. We do keep sales records, even though it doesn't make it into the benchmark. We do like to have some. Uh, we make notes for next year. I'll talk about which notes go into the crop planning. Crop yields per dollars per bed, I already talked about, but this is the like where it would go in the order of events, and then finally all these get feed into the planting. Um, 445. So this is what our harvest sheet looks like. It's got basically we write down what we harvested the way. I get benefits from a lot of them. The tops are moving to the top. That comes here. This is what got harvested, what went to two different markets, what came back. So there's some things to write down what got harvested, what goes into the market, and then also like what came back from the market. Um, Most of the sales records of what came back from the market, we use for like, all right, things that we have some leeway in harvest, like bunches of kale or pounds of salad mix. We kind of want to keep tabs of like how much is selling each week, so that then next week we can decide, all right, how much am I going to send next week? Whereas like for a season end thing, I'm like more just concerned about like overall, how did the crop sell? Like, did we toss like bins and bins of eggplants, or for the most part, did we sell through all of them? But week to week, I always look at my previous, uh, previous month's notes just on how much is from next week. This spreadsheet, uh, so we use some things to just kind of get harvested as they're ready and mature, like cucumbers, you just harvest what's there, and not in a set schedule. We harvest almost every day. Zucchinis, all that stuff that just gets harvested when it's ready gets on a separate sheet. I'm also, I would say, partial to paper records. We have these on clipboards that we keep in the barn so people can write them down. Uh, it means that then at the end of the season, we have to go in and manually enter them. Um, but as opposed to like electronic records, I feel like it's easier to keep tabs on what gets written down when you can see, I can just glance at the piece of paper, you know, who harvested the scallions, how many bunches did you get? It doesn't count if you tell me, you have to write it down. Um, so those sales records, like I said, what went to the market, what came back. Mostly I like to use those for adjustments to next week's harvest on things we have leeway. But if there's something big that's like, we're just not selling the eggplants, we want to note it as well. Uh, but it's a good way to kind of like keep track of like how our different markets are doing on an ongoing basis. And then sale notes for next year. This is specifically notes that have to do with this is planting plans, planting plan. Uh, so specifically notes relating to planting. This we have a binder that has like the seeding plan. So it has sheets for everything that gets seeded in chronological order. The where it's going in the field and all that. In the front of the binder, there's like a stack of blank pages, and whenever me or Kelly think of something that is relevant that we want to apply to next year's planting plan, we jot it down. So like this variety of lettuce sucks, don't grow it again. This variety of lettuce is really heat tolerant. This one is not. Uh, you know, this variety of cucumber, it's got flea beetles. No, well, not flea beetles, whatever. You get the picture. So this one is doing well. This isn't. This is something. This was This was ready earlier than this other variety. This one got all apart. All that stuff. Both varieties. Whether in August we didn't have enough solid mix to fill our, really supply our markets with how much we wanted. We should grow more ready in August. So planting those salad were ready at the same time, so we should stagger them more. All that stuff matters in terms of planting varieties. Uh, and also, and female like planting issues as well. So you mentioned like when you have like long successful plants that you want to plant after. Uh, well, the zucchini one will be out by July, but it wasn't, and so we had to move this other crop that was supposed to be after it around. And so next year we won't make the mistake of like planting it like that. We'll adjust it. Uh, so again, so from that, then we also get our crop yields for bed, which are a combination of our harvest records with our, planting records of how much we planted for each. Again, we already discussed like what it means, but this is where it belongs in the order of events. We just have to make sure it gets written down. Question?
It's like 20 months to do that too, and then it seems like it's September and got like 4 notes and like
Yeah, it's kind of nice running down those notes. And one of the main things is like having those sheets flow for that purpose. Uh, So you're not like, oh, I need to like remember this and like hunting, like what am I going to do about this to remember this, or like leaving yourself a voicemail or whatever. Like, there's a set place where these notes go that relate to the planting plan, and then the off season we can look through them. So I think that's the biggest thing, because then once you have that, it's not like you necessarily have to write them down right away all the time. This is for like me and Callie mostly. And so sometimes like it's not like, okay, we were full solid in August. It could be September, like, oh, I should write this down. We're full solid in August. I should remember this from this year. Like now we're gonna solid again. We'll remember who we worked with. So you know, you still things slip through the cracks, but if you have a system for it, uh, then you can then you can start getting into the habit. And then in the off season, we're like, God damn it, I remember there was something and I can't remember what it was. I should have written it down. Then maybe next year you will write it down. So then the planting plan comes out of that. It's what gets planted. I'm planting means pretty detailed. We were planting the seeding dates for it, where it's going to get transplanted. Now we do a lot of what we do is transplanted, but still, like where in the field is going to go, when we think it's going to be harvested, uh, and then it ends up being kind of like the same information in a few different formats. There's one format that's like, something like this. This might be like, you know, the like the 18 plantings are all in a row right here because we know if we want plant successions, it'll be like 2 weeks or whatever, so they get moved over here. And then like a single, weekly single plantings are over here. My salad 1 through salad 23. And how many beds of those and where they in. So there's one that's like by food types. But then there's another one, we did all that, well, we had, the chronology, we have my top to it, that we want, salad every week, and we want carrots every 2 weeks, and scallions every 3 weeks. And then we recently by a chronological seeding plan. So now we eat it all down. August, whatever, March 1st, we're doing this, March 1st, this, March 1st, this, March 8th, this, March 8th, this, March 8th, this, we sorted by date. And then another one where, this bed by bed, this is going in A1, this is going in B2. So all that information that's put into a few different formats that then is useful for the season. Um, so that concludes planting plan. Question?
Are you using some sort of program or is it just like a custom cell?
This is something when you find a database set, this is like my dream, but you have to do databases. That'd be ideal for this because these are sheets, which is just like a table like this, and when you have the same information over a few different formats, you have the same information duplicated, and you run the risk of like you make a change in one place and it doesn't necessarily feed through the other places. Where the database is all the information is in one place, and then you can like pull that to display it in different ways. So we could have all the information in one place and then still like pull these different formats for looking at it. And if you wanted to change something, it would filter through everything. It's not, it's just going to stay like this and we're going to kludge through it because by the time I figure the database out would be retired. It honestly, we have like 10, I think is one of them. Like those kind of like formatted, not really are if the database is set up for this. But we don't. So yeah, um, it's that's too deep. So sort of running out of time. So so delegating tasks is another thing that's in the off season prep because it's something you have to prepare for in the off season. Remember the value of your time, so you want to justify. Like I want to train these people from the start of the season on how to do this stuff so they can get the experience. I also have planning to train in April. If it's like July, like I can't be out here watering seedlings anymore. I need to like can that enough. I don't have time, but I also don't have time to show someone and like sit with them to like how to water seedlings. And I'm afraid that like they're not gonna do it right, and either like they're gonna get reached out or dry out. Like you really want to like need to like decide what you're gonna delegate this year that you haven't delegated before, and start at the beginning of the season so those people can like get their mastery of the task when you have time to sit with them and guide them through it rather than like you're strung out in the busy season and you just want to like dump things on someone else. So you want to start from the start of the season, so that way the same person can kind of like get that judgment of how to do the task. 'Cause like something like watering seedlings is different in April than it is in May, than it is in June. And someone jumps in, they might not get that learning in. Um, other things that I want to delegate, things like running irrigation. I find that super annoying, but it's like, well, it'll take me like 10 minutes to set this up to run it. It'll take someone else like 30 minutes. Uh, but again, I have to like remember the value of my time, that if I train them on it in April, in July, they can just like write it down. Here you go, and I'm done with it. So, um, machine work's another one where like people need practice to get up and going on it. You can't just like hand them the keys and get them going, set them to go. That said, I do have, so I'm like talking a little faster than it's getting close to 5, but I do have some tasks that I don't delegate. We've been cheap on the direct seating. I don't delegate them, or plain reading. And, like, why don't I want to hand off like direct seating? What is it about that task? Am I just being stubborn, or is there something about it? I think I realized, you know, the reason I don't hand off direct seating is because once you seed something, you can't tell if it was done well or not, until it's too late to do something about it. Like if you seed carrots and they weren't done right, then they're so slow to germinate, you're not gonna be able to tell were those carrots seeded right or not until it's too late to like make up that succession, especially if you're doing like winter carrots. So plus I, admit I'm terrible at direct seeding. Well, I shouldn't say I'm terrible at direct seeding, but being consistent, I always find like I have like things aren't always ideal. And so I need to kind of like adjust what I'm doing, learn from what I do. And I find that if I do it, then I can remember it's like, well, I held the cedar like this way instead of the way, or like the soil was a little funky, or was it a little damp? And I can like remember what I did when I see how things came up and learn from that. Whereas if I just like hand that off and it comes out poorly, it was like, well, so and so just it's a direct seeding. So like it's easy to like not learn if you're not the one doing it. So um, yeah, so we don't have much time. So like the next section I had was on weekly, daily planning. Again, this is now taking some of that and taking some of like our big picture stuff and doing it for, all right, this is what we do week to week. So first step is we're gonna rough out the steps for the week. I'm gonna skip through because again, it's almost 5. So we do a walkabout, me and Kelly go through the entire farm. We write down on a waterproof notebook what needs to be done or what could be done that week. So we have all the list of the tasks. This is what could be done this week. We could hand weed these carrots, thin this, trellis that, hoe this, clear this, prep that. This is what's on the seeding plan. This is what needs to be transplanted. Everything goes down on a list in a waterproof notebook. The nice thing about the waterproof notebook is then at the end of the year, it's another record of what we did. All right, week of 5/12, this was what was on the list. And then like week of 5/19, some of the things, same things were on the list, but we didn't do them. And then I can just see until when that dropped off the list. Okay, that's the week, we cleared the cucumbers or whatever. But we can see, well, when did we see flea beetles? When did we like need to net this? When did we like clear that? It's all roughly in the notebook. And then from that, we take those tasks, we put them on, manage using them, so map out your labor, like who's coming for that week. How many tasks that don't move, like either on harvest days, so that doesn't move, on working days, those don't move. Then other things that maybe need to happen on specific days. Where's your cultivation window? All right, the sunny day, is going to be windows, so that's going to be cultivation. Focus, block out that stuff, and then you can like put in the stuff, other stuff based on where you have space. And then once you have your weekly task planned out, now each day you go from that list to like prioritize. All right, what am I doing today? And so there's a few different ways to think about what am I going to prioritize today versus not. So one is what do we have to do today, or else like forget about it, like it's a lost cause. So one is cultivation. This is county then, and you can see these are the counts. Let's start with if I get those together, like those counts are done. And this was like August seeded carrots. Like if these carrots don't survive, then we don't have carrots in the winter. And so today I'm gonna go hold these carrots in the sun. But then, whereas like, there's other tasks where it's like, well, we don't have to do this today. We can put it off. Second way of prioritizing is, all right, well, what's the value of the crop we're working on? You can use that kind of like dollars per bed as a guide. All right, what's the value of those carrots? Are they going to sell? Well, yes, they're definitely going to sell because it's, the winter carrots will sell. Um, and then so you can kind of decide, you know, whatever, 30 minutes to hold those carrots, definitely worth it. Uh, in terms of like prioritizing, this is just one of my like mental rules is my one third, one third, one third rule. If I'm like thinking of like, is this worth it or not? I kind of divide mentally that gross sales per bed into thirds, production expense overhead, well, production, sales expense overhead. And so like that way, uh, you know, when you go to the farmer's market and you sell like $1,200, oh, we're really, it's like, well, the value of the crops there should have been like, 400 for the sale, 400 for the production. Uh, and so I'm going to kind of like skip over this a little bit because, um, um, so last way of prioritizing is like which task is closer to money. Uh, so in other words, like what task are you doing that's like, so doing the little teeny teeny counts is pretty far from money. Like those counts aren't going to be money for months. But harvesting greens for cereal, if they don't sell, then that's like almost money in your pocket. And so, where you prioritize, that's another like axis of, you want to make sure you kind of balance it out. You do want to have a pipeline of things coming so you can have money like months down the line. But you also want to make sure you prioritize, going to the market, harvesting for sales, all that stuff. Uh, Finally, outlook for the coming weeks too. Like, if you're behind, are you going to be more behind or less behind in the coming weeks? Am I going to have like, people on sick or on vacation? Will they be back? Do I have my college students starting work in a couple of weeks, so I'll have more workers, or did everyone just leave to go back to school and I'm going to be short staffed? And that really makes a decision, helps you make your decisions. Like those teeny tiny carrots, like I'm just going to be buried in a couple of weeks. I it would affect my decision whether like put them into the system or just like let them go and be done with it because even if I hold them now, in a couple of weeks, I'm not going to have time to hold them again. So just give it. Should be fun. Um, all right. So the last section is on just like making improvements, taking our, kind of like the intuition we worked on and going for improvements. That said, this is a subject that you could do a whole presentation on. For example, like I don't know if anyone's familiar with like Taylor Mendel from like habit farming and stuff. I think she does like a whole like spiel on it. But basically it's, what do you want to implement on your farm as improvements as you go? Um, One of the things that helps is get feedback from your crew. So we did a Dan Reese voice, the survey that you can send to your crew, or you can help, tweak it to get more useful information, but basically like what's their outlook on how the work is going, and that can help you like get your own knowledge in place. Now that said, it is 5:04, so I am going to end with, let's see, this is the last thing, like now when you're making improvements is when you break out your lean farm book and you look at the different things, that you can do to like organize your schools, make your workflow more efficient, and all that. When you kind of have that uh, driving in mind. So, I'm just gonna skip the end because you know what? It's 5:04.